Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Chilling Reflections by Drew Hayes, narrated by Amy Landon. Prologue. On the charred remains of a world long ago fallen, a single being puttered about. VRX-77 moved swiftly, walking through the carefully constructed compound to the alarm annoyingly beeping in every room. Gleaming silver walls were a stark contrast to the burning red sky and roasted brown dust that lay outside, a barren wasteland where nothing thrived. VRX-77's own body was a similar hue, a sleek silver form with hints of ruby woven throughout. Its heavy steps were soundless, however, muffled by one of the multitude of internal devices active at all times. Quieter footsteps were merely one small aspect, a drop in the bucket compared to the chronoflow disruptor, spatial relocator, multi-layer energy barriers, and the nigh-endless array of offensive weapons at its disposal. Still, for a metal being living in a metal compound, the clanging from each step was almost inescapable otherwise. So one might argue VRX-77 gained more benefit from the reduced audio annoyance than its more advanced features. Of course, that didn't help much when that infernal beeping wouldn't stop. VRX-77 had no one else to blame. It had created the noise itself, purposely chosen to be as grating as possible. When centering the majority of its attention on a project, external stimuli were often ignored, so a sound that was impossible to ignore had been necessary for this particular alarm. No matter what other project might be at hand, this was a notice VRX-77 always wanted to catch. Arriving at the heart of the compound, VRX-77 stood before a massive wall of monitors and tapped a single button on a waiting keyboard. With that single motion, the alarm cut off at last. What arose in its place was a cavalcade of images, data, and other tidbits cycling through the dozen-plus screens that were now active. VRX-77 studied them carefully, occasionally tapping another button to pause at a particular frame of information. The automated detection algorithm was working as intended. All signs were indeed present. In one of the technically endless sections of the multiverse, a dimensional nova was building. Judging by the readings, there were perhaps a handful of days in the adjacent universes before it erupted. Running a gleaming hand over the keyboard, VRX-77 began to type more dutifully. New scans activated, searching the innumerable worlds contained within the range of the dimensional nova. Worlds without meta-capable beings were eliminated first, as those were guaranteed not to have what was needed. Next went the ones without the precise combination of elements required. After that, the parameters grew more circumstantial, zeroing in on minute factors to determine the likelihood of a match. The first world clocked in at a dismal 20%, but VRX-77 still noted it in case that was the best option. The second showed a slightly more encouraging 34%, which remained the frontrunner, until VRX-77 found a world with a 60% match for the target. 60% was high enough that VRX-77 nearly locked the coordinates then and there. However, experience had taught the importance of thoroughness. Methodically, it continued to check each viable world, though it was purely formality. 60% was the best reading it had gotten in the last dozen expeditions. When a new number appeared on screen, VRX-77 stopped typing momentarily, staring in dumbfounded shock. 97%! There was a world in range of the dimensional nova with a 97% match? Suddenly the silver hands were flying once more, digging deeper into the data. Fate was never so kind. For a reading that good, there had to be a catch. There was. Leaning back from the keyboard, VRX-77 stared at the one factor it always took great pains to avoid. A lodestar. Their presence made getting in hard enough, though the dimensional nova would handle the heavy lifting in this case. The trouble was moving around in a world that a lodestar protected. Even when VRX-77 used a dimensional synchronizer, lodestars could sense dimensional interlopers, and they were always strong enough to be a threat. That was why VRX-77 avoided the lodestar dimensions as much as possible. But For 97%. That was too high. VRX-77 couldn't ignore the opportunity, even if it did come with considerable risk. Luckily, there was still time to prepare. By customizing its devices to be as stealth-oriented as possible, it might be viable to stay off Lodestar's radar, just long enough to get the job done and escape. In the shining compound resting atop a dead world, a flurry of activity began. There were only days to prepare, and VRX-77 intended to be as ready as possible. For a chance this good, it had to get things right this time. The crackle of fire from the burning sconces cast strange shadows over the man with kaleidoscope eyes. Yet his curious eyes were barely noticeable next to the enormous cerulean serpent sharing the same chamber. Its body wove to and fro in a downright impossible arrangement that appeared to go on forever. Scary as its massive jaws were, those with guile took quick note of the intelligence shining in its eyes. That was the true threat it posed. And yet, this towering monster inclined its head to the simple man in a dirty overcoat. A modest bow, but one all the same. When it spoke, the voice did not echo with the force its size would indicate. "The offerings have been made. The arrangement has been honored. Will you pass along the message?" Silence stretched between them, as potentially endless as the serpent's body, until it was snuffed out. "Very well." Beneath the kaleidoscope eyes, a twisted smile took shape, one that spoke clearly to its owner's madness. "This has the potential to be very entertaining indeed. The Nova will burst in 4 days for their world. I suggest you be ready." Then he was gone, as if edited out of reality. Alone in the stone chamber, the enormous serpent let out a small breath of relief. While the serpent didn't fear the madman who called himself Nexus, there was no guarantee he would play along with the request. Nexus was self-serving, but that wasn't an entirely negative trait. By finding a way to ensure the gambit offered something Nexus wanted to watch, the serpent ensured he would be properly motivated to see the task through. Knowing 4 days in the other world would be considerably more for him, the serpent still hurried to get to work. Now that he was sure a guest would be coming, it was important to set a proper welcome, especially for someone this renowned. Besides, he had to make the visit count. If all went to plan, it would be the last one they ever shared. There was no staff in the bar. They'd stopped showing up shortly after the Rexren invasion, and Grantham never cared enough to try to track them down. Every morning when he arrived, the coolers had been refilled, food prepped and left in the kitchen fridge, and repairs were made to whatever he'd broken last. So Grantham sat in the bar alone, day after day, a child sipping down beer after unwilling frosty beer, watching the world through a battered television mounted in the corner. Some might have said all he'd really done in escaping Rookstone was trade one prison cell for another. Those people were fucking idiots, so far as Grantham was concerned. Prison didn't have beer, sunshine, and a tropical beach within jogging distance. Jogging distance for him, anyway. Then again, prison also didn't have annoying pests trying to drag him into their schemes. Because today, Grantham wasn't alone in his bar. Seated across the booth was a mundane-looking man in a simple black suit. The bowler hat and spectacles were his most distinguishing features, aside from his criminal record. The man possessed a power that could turn the tables on many a meta, cape or villain alike, and as such was usually treated with a degree of fearful respect. "Would you get to the goddamn point, Bird?" Grantham interrupted, not even having listened to the last 5 minutes of drivel. "I let you keep your head despite walking in here uninvited, but professional courtesy only goes so far. We're 5 minutes from Pick That Door, and I'm not missing my favorite game show." "Of course. Bert showed little reaction to the disrespect, though Grantham imagined things would go differently against another meta.
I was just conveying that my sources tell me a major dimensional event will be occurring soon, one that will temporarily create opportunities that might not normally exist. I have put together a plan that makes use of the chance to facilitate. This can't be you getting to the point.
Bert took a long breath, forced a smile on his face, wavering.
Apologies. I suppose at its core what I am here offering you is a chance for revenge.
For the first time since Bert entered, Grantham shifted his full attention away from the television screen.
Revenge? We were both stuffed in that hole for over a decade. Who the hell am I supposed to be going after? Because if it's the one who put me there, I may as well just walk back in myself.
In response, Bert produced a photograph from his suit jacket pocket. Sliding it across the table, he said nothing, allowing Grantham to draw his own conclusions. The picture itself was of a headless body, far from the first Grantham had witnessed, but the sight still gave him pause. Between the green hands, the strange shape, and the purple overcoat, it was impossible not to recognize that body.
Somebody killed Lazora? Word is it was done by one of the guild's newer members, a rookie going by Hephaestus.
Bert maintained a neutral tone, even as the undeniable hints of a smirk tugged at his cheeks.
Perhaps now you see why I thought it wise to reach out. I would hardly deny one of your stature the chance to avenge a friend.
Grantham stared at the photograph, the blood pooling near the stump, the sharp glint of light against her claws. It seemed like yesterday she was in here, pitching some scheme herself. But that had been before the Rexren invasion, which meant several months had passed since he last saw Lazora. Now, he never would again.
And what is it you would need from Jokul, exactly?
The tugging smirk threatened to fully manifest at those words, but Bert wisely denied it.
A distraction, when the time is right. Nothing more than that.
To trust Bert, one had to either be naive or stupid. Grantham was neither, yet he found himself interested all the same. There would be some manner of trickery afoot. With Bert, the schemes were unavoidable. But if it gave him the chance to seize something he wanted, that was fine. If Bert became a real problem, Jokul would simply tear off his limbs. No one ever had much fight left in them after that. Hephaestus Metasuit, version 2. Basic functionality test commencing. Tori's words would activate the recording function in her laboratory's cameras, one of the many perks of not working in a concrete bunker intended as a parking spot. In the months since Ivan first booked her more advanced lab space at the Guild's headquarters, Tori had made ample use of the accommodations, the tremendous majority of her efforts going into the project currently wrapped around her semi-incorporeal body. Fueled from the torrent of heat created by Tori turning into living fire, composed of a material mimicking the body of a nigh-indestructible meta, and crammed with every upgrade the electrical system could support, she had officially completed the second version of her Hephaestus metasuit. Unlike her first design, which was effectively a prototype banged into working order piece by piece, this represented a step forward from the initial proof of concept. Tori had established that she could create a metasuit. The next step was building one strong enough to suit her needs. Between losing fights with capes and being rendered ineffectual against the asshole who invaded their apartment during the Rexren invasions, Tori was just about fed up with feeling underpowered. A brief flash from her trip to Hollowville flitted through her mind, along with memories of what it was like to wield a fraction of Ivan's power. It would be a lie to say her ambitions didn't reach such heights, but Tori was at least sensible enough to realize just how far she was from reaching them. There was a lot of ground to cover between her current abilities and even that taste of real power she'd experienced. The new metasuit would hopefully narrow that gap. Tori walked around her lab, feeling the suit's motors react to the guidance of her heat. Navigating in fire form had taken a fair bit of practice and fine-tuning, but there was no getting around the superior heat output and higher degree of safety. With her new suit's upgraded sensors, the experience was far smoother, her movements no longer seeming so jerky and robotic. Activating the dozens of small gravity distortion devices embedded across the suit, Tori felt its weight lighten, her movements becoming even easier. Unlike her last suit, this version now had 3 of the full-size gravity distorters, as her influx of income made it possible to finally build more. On top of allowing for easier, smoother flight, Tori could now carry other people. Not for long, and it was a massive drain on power, but if push came to shove, she wouldn't have to leave a friend in the lurch. Activating flight function? Tori rose from the ground as a carefully contained stream of fire shot from her back, lifting her gracefully into the air. As she had with walking, she found aerial movement far easier thanks to the system upgrades. Her suit hung in the air above her workstation like a floating void, the dark material reflecting as little light as it could manage. It felt somewhat fitting, given whose finger she'd derived the compound from. A few flares of red light flashed along the suit. These were capable of turning off when secrecy was needed, but Tori had decided the splash of color was a nice aesthetic touch. The design helped connect her 2 suits, forming a sense of continuity. While she was planning to keep developing and growing her equipment, Tori would forever think fondly of that first functional suit. It was a foundation on top of which future successes would be built. Settling down in front of a pre-calibrated laser cannon, Tori mentally readied herself. There was always something tough about letting herself get shot, even when she should be perfectly safe. Durability test. Engaging. With a remote signal from her own suit, the cannon fired, blasting Tori in the sternum with a beam roughly 50% of the maximum power she could currently generate. The flash of energy would have seared her eyes, had she possessed any at the moment. Her helm's cameras were unbothered by the bright light, just as her torso was unsinged by the focused beam. She scanned it with every type of camera the helm had, just to be sure, but the results were consistent. No discernible damage, despite the intensity of the attack. The metal shell holding was more or less a given at these power levels. More impressive was that her internal systems didn't register so much as a blip. The suit's new material was proving to insulate against damage, as well as standing up to a ton of it. Around a year ago, Tori would have said she'd trade anything for an upgrade like this. But that had been before taking a job to rob the wrong vault, before joining a guild of villains who did things with longevity in mind, before making friends with capes and crooks alike. More importantly, it had been before a cape named Ike teleported himself into deep space, saving Tori and his friends, willingly paying the ultimate price. Tori wouldn't have traded a friend's life for more power. That was something she knew now, having had the bargain forced upon her. But she also wasn't willing to abandon a useful tool out of misplaced sentimentality. They'd lost Ike because none of them was strong enough to win the fight any other way. Tori could think of no better way to honor his memory than making sure next time trouble came to call, Hephaestus was able to send it screaming into the night. Chapter 1. The day of the dimensional nova's eruption, Tori Rivas was not at work. Had she been at the Indigo Technologies facility where her line of self-defense equipment was being refined, Tori would have been locked away behind dozens of shields and fail-safe devices. Were she at her true lab on the Guild's Volcano Island headquarters, Tori would have been even safer, protected by the highest degree of defenses an entire legion of supervillains could devise. Instead, on the morning such a dire event was fated to transpire, Tori was bouncing along in a borrowed van that bore the logo of Ridge City Grinders along its side. Chloe was driving, as it was from her work the vehicle had been loaned, with Beverly seated in a passenger seat, helping to navigate. For her part, Tori had a job she was taking very seriously. Tori Rivas was sulking. "This is such a waste of time." Her words drew a loud groan from Beverly, who turned around in her seat. "For the umpteenth time, you have got to get some new work clothes. Next month, they're going to have you start doing more appearances in meetings, eventually working up toward doing press stuff again. What's wrong with the outfits from our own supplier?" Tori favored the clothing made through their guild, predominantly because it was made from metamaterials, able to change form into fire with her. Although she developed her own, they were never quite as soft or durable as what the guild produced. Not to mention, she'd grown to enjoy a tailored fit. "The problem is, you don't make buy everything bespoke money yet. And even if you did, sooner or later someone will talk to you and realize there is no way you would spend what that sort of wardrobe costs on mere clothes. Beverly pointed to Tori's current ensemble, a t-shirt and jeans, both stained with oil, the latter sporting several holes along the cuffs. That's why we're going to the outlet shops at the edge of town. Factory reject pricing is the only believable way you'd pay for a designer label. I'm excited to spruce up my outfits, too, Chloe added. Spring's just around the corner. My closet could use some lighter weather wear. Tori leaned back, accepting her defeat for the moment. It was 2 against 1, really 3, if she wanted to count her own judgment. This was something she needed to do. The idea just held zero appeal for her. Adding friends to the mix would hopefully make the experience somewhat enjoyable, though Tori had added a bit of a bribe to push her motivation over the edge. In the back of the van rested an unassuming black case, within which lay Tori's new Hephaestus armor. The case was made from her extra-durable metal, only with a plastic coating on top to hide the telltale dark hue. She'd worked in several of the smaller gravity distortion devices, making the suit's heft easily haulable. Not far from where the outlet shop sat, there was a large canyon that went on for several miles, the perfect sort of isolated spot where Tori could give her new suit's flight functions a test run in the outside world. Soaring through the sky in her freshly built suit was the treat waiting for her at the end of shopping's ordeal. Next to the case rested a gray duffel bag with Beverly's Bahamut costume stowed haphazardly away. That one was brought along for when you get into trouble, though Tori suspected the true motivation was a chance to get some flying in. Being metahumans wasn't always easy, and the life it had led several of them to was actively dangerous. But with those losses came the trade-off of experiences a normal person could never have. Flying was absolutely among the best of those experiences, and Tori didn't blame her friend for fitting in some sky time when able. Technically, they could have booked transport to a remote location through guild assets like tunnel vision, but the cost of that sort of travel added up quickly. Flitting her gaze up to the rearview mirror, Tori's eyes narrowed. That same sedan has been keeping pace with us for the last 15 minutes or so. Well, it's a highway. There's only one direction, and we are all going about the same speed, Chloe pointed out. No. You two are going the same speed. Everyone else is doing at least 5 miles over. Tori scooted forward, poking her head toward the dash and confirming that Chloe was indeed locked in at the speed limit. She looked a bit sheepish, though made no effort to increase their speed. I can't risk getting pulled over. What if they search the van and find that stuff you brought? We appreciate the concern, but you don't need to worry that much, Beverly replied. My stuff just looks like random costume pieces at most, workout equipment if I sell it right. And I'm sure Tori built some sort of false latch system, so the box opens to mundane contents when the wrong person tries to open it. Beverly turned around for confirmation, only to blanch at the embarrassed expression on Tori's face. You did put in some sort of failsafe, right? Maybe it's best if Chloe just sticks to her current speed. In her mind, Tori made a note to add something like Beverly's suggestion. It was an excellent idea if she wanted to haul the suit around with her. Still doesn't explain why the other car is matching our pace. Most people don't need reasons to obey the law. Do you not see all the cars passing us? Tori jerked a thumb out the window just in time to see a massive SUV painted garish orange roar past, jerking to avoid collisions. Okay, Beverly conceded. Maybe they're hauling sketchy villain suits too, or maybe they just like following the rules. Tori summoned up her best scoff. What sort of square likes following the rules? Did you see that orange SUV? I'm half tempted to call them in for reckless driving. Austin had his hands at 10 at 2, mirrors carefully adjusted, and cruise control locked in at precisely the posted speed limit. For anyone accustomed to driving at more socially standardized speeds, the ride was frustrating. For his best friend Kyle, a metahuman gifted with super speed, it was downright agonizing. Do you want me to get their plates? You don't even need to slow down. I can zip right out the door. Kyle was already reaching for the handle when a flash of light from the passenger seat forced him to pause. Elliot turned around to stare at him, a soft crackle of power visible in her eyes. "Keep it planted right there, mister. If we let you out, you're going to zip ahead, do all the shopping you need to, and then whine about how bored you are for the rest of the trip. The seasons are changing. We need new clothes, and I'm excited to explore these outlet shops. Chloe said it's a whole outdoor complex, including several eateries."
"Are you bribing me?" Kyle asked.
"If you'd rather keep pouting, we can skip the food and stick to shopping so we're done faster."
Kyle folded his arms, then realized the optics and shook them out. "I'm not pouting. I just feel like there are better ways we could be spending our time." From the driver's seat, Austin piped up. "Respectfully, I have to disagree. We've been going hard these last few months. If we're not in the field, we're training. If not training, we're undertaking a side project like the trip to Hollowville. We barely even see our friends in the building where we live. Giving your all is important, but you can't do that if you're run too ragged. Recovery matters. So today we're just 3 normal friends doing some shopping. And eating," Kyle added. "Shopping and eating. You don't need to sell me on it. I'm already peckish."
Austin agreed. Silence fell as a sports car bolted past on their left. It was a strange experience, letting the quiet settle over them. For years, these moments would be filled with jabber from Ike, analyses of past fights, vulgar tales designed to make Austin squirm, flippant jokes, and startling insights. One never knew what would come from that man next. Ike had proven that to the very end, when the team was faced with a threat they simply could not overcome. A villain so strong that their collective efforts were barely able to manage a single injury on his hand. Yet of them all, only he saw the way forward, despite the cost it demanded. Ike had teleported himself and their adversary into the cold clutches of deep space, paying the ultimate price to save his team. His friends. Tormented by that memory, how could Kyle do anything but throw himself into the job? If he'd been faster, mastered more super speed techniques, had some sort of ace in the hole, would there have been a way to save Ike? It was a question he could never answer, and one he was determined not to end up asking himself again. When the next Alfred settler attacked, Tachyon had to be ready, because Kyle wasn't sure if he had it in him to bury another friend. Nor was he prepared to let the silence fill in where Ike's prattle was missing. "All right, Ellie, lay the game plan on me. What shops are we hitting, and how many places out there sell food covered in melted cheese?" Shit! Ren jerked the wheel, narrowly avoiding a collision as he struggled to keep the borrowed vehicle under control. Driving had once been among his favorite ways to relax. Before the accident, he would cruise the highways to the outskirts of town, enjoying the passing scenery and soothing ride. So when the group decided to take a trip to the edge of town, it seemed like an excellent chance to rekindle an old passion. The trouble was that the Alliance of Heroic Champions only had so many vehicles available for their superheroes to check out. Were he proportional to a standard human, Ren would have had a fair selection of options. However, given his prodigious bulk as a living amalgamation of dozens of animals, there was only one vehicle suited for him to drive. Originally built for a superhero named Rocket Jock, the bright orange SUV was designed for someone of enhanced proportions, making it viable for Ren to pilot. The issue was that it had also been built with specs that intended more active use than daily driving demanded. At the slight touch of the accelerator, the car would shoot forward, and the hyper-responsive steering wheel only served to compound the problem. All of which catalyzed into a terribly harrowing ride for Ren and his 3 passengers. Donald Moss, the man who went by Cybergeek while acting in his capacity as a superhero, was in the passenger seat, face twisted in a mix of terror and exhilaration not unlike the expression he wore mid-combat. In the back, Irene had partially formed an armor of ice around her head and torso, demonstrating why her superhero moniker was Cold Shoulder. As for Lucy, who wasn't wearing the usual magical ensemble that identified Hat Trick, she had a deck of cards she was nervously shuffling. Ren himself had little to fear from a car crash. Despite the illusion conjured by the bangle on his wrist, he was always in his superhero form. Known as Medley, the array of stolen animal features woven through his genetics kept him safe from such mundane injuries. The others, however, were more vulnerable when unprepared, which was part of why he fought so hard to get the SUV under control. Mercifully, they drove under a large sign indicating that their destination was only a handful of exits away. After Austin had mentioned his team visiting outlet shops soon, Donald pitched the idea.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?